Hey, welcome to Light Church.
Yeah, you have made it to our virtual gathering and we are very excited to have you with us this morning.
We're going to head into one song of worship, then into a short message.
Yeah, we hope today's message leaves you encouraged and inspired to be all that God has made you to be. So prepare yourselves for worship. We will see you right here at the end.
You're the horizon and the bright, the glimmer that breaks the constant night. You are the brilliance and the dream, the evidence of things unseen. 'Cause even the darkest days are temporary. The time and space could not contain you. You were the everlasting light. You were the glory, and it stays. You never dim, you never fade. You were the power and the truth. Nothing can stop you, and nothing can stop you. 'Cause even the darkest days are temporary. You were the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You were the even the darkest days are temporary. You were the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You were the everlasting light. 'Cause even the darkest days are temporary. You were the everlasting light. All of the time and space could not contain you. You were the everlasting light. Oh, oh, oh. You were the everlasting light.
Have you ever noticed that in times of difficulty or in times of pain or trouble in our life, that unless we have thought about it beforehand or we're really, really intentional, as humans, we tend to reach out for the closest or most convenient thing or person to help us. Where, I don't know, maybe in your own life you've experienced this, that, when things go south in life or things are really difficult, it's so easy for us to reach out for the things that are closest to us. That might be work colleagues, or it might be leaning on certain addictions or dysfunctional habits or tendencies in our life. Whatever it might be for you, I know I've experienced this in my own life, that I often will just reach out in the moment because I've not really thought about it, I've not really put those things in place, but I've just reached out because I need help in that moment. I hit this point of desperation. It's been interesting. Recently, we've been working with some local prisons, and I was chatting to a guy who'd done prison work for years, and he was talking to me about when a prisoner is released from prison, they get handed a small amount of money. I think it's 50, 60 pounds, and they are literally sent out. Sometimes they have prearranged agreements where they can have accommodation or whatever it might be, but more often than not, a person will be released from prison and they will just be out in the world figuring things out. And what's interesting about this is when a person leaves prison and they're released back into the same community that they first offended in, there is a really high conviction rate of a person going back to prison, like re-offending. And one of the reasons for this, this guy was telling me, is the fact that when a person is released from prison back into that same community, they're often in a place where they're very socially isolated. They're in a place where they can often just feel at the end of themselves. That, imagine just starting again. They've got this whole sort of second chance, to do what it is they've got to do, or to live out this life that's within them. But they often, in this place of desperation, reach out and turn to those things that are closest to them and most convenient. For example, relationships that they had in the past, or those friends or those habits that actually got them convicted for some crime in the first place. It just seems to be part of humanity that when we experience pain or trouble or isolation, or we just get ourselves into a position where we need help, we tend to reach out for the things that are closest to us and most convenient. See, the problem is with this is that life is a road that is going to be complete. It's a guarantee that you're going to face trouble in your life. Okay, it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, you might encounter trouble. Like, I can promise you, and if you've lived long enough, you will know there is no such thing as a problem-free or a trouble-free life. So the problem is, if we don't learn as humans to be intentional about the things that we turn to when we need help, we can actually put ourselves at risk of inviting some really unhealthy things into our life, or relying on some really dysfunctional ways of dealing with things, and ultimately compound the problem, ultimately make the problem so much worse. I want to look at a psalm today, Psalm 121. And I believe this psalm speaks into this so beautifully. And my aim for today isn't to sort of puff you up with more knowledge. My aim isn't to, just simply give you a 10-step program or, application to, deal with problems in your life. That's not what this is. My aim for today is simply just to encourage your soul, to remind your soul that actually there is a God, and He is present, and He wants to help you in your life, that He is available to journey through this life with you, whatever it is you are facing. So I hope this encouraged me as I have studied for it. Psalm 121, let's look at it. So it says, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. And the sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. I think this is a beautiful psalm. And a little bit of context on this. This is a psalm written by a pilgrim. It's one of the psalms called a psalm of ascent, or a song of ascent. And it's kind of like a worship song, or a song of confession. And it was written by a pilgrim. Now, in those times, pilgrims would often make this long pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And they do it roughly around 3 times a year. And what they would do is they would have to journey through the valley. Now it's a very mountainous region. They would journey through the valley, and up on the mountains, there would be thieves and there would be people that would be out to rob people that traveled through the valley. And interesting enough, it was a sort of quite a straight road in that sense. And off in the distance, you would be able to see Jerusalem because it'd be up in an elevated, like on a mountain, or in an elevated plain of land, and they would be able to see it in the distance. So this psalm is written by this pilgrim who is speaking to himself or to a group of people that he is traveling with, because you would not want to travel through the valley on your own. It's not something that people would do. They would travel in groups to kind of protect one another. And this beautiful psalm is this pilgrim basically saying that God is his help in times of trouble. So I want to walk through this. It's split into 4 key passages, or 4 key little sections, which is verses 1 and 2, verses 3 and 4, verses 5 and 6, and verses 7 and 8. These 4 areas are kind of reminders. This psalmist is reminding himself, reminding his friends, reminding his soul about the characteristics of God when it comes to this journey that they are making. And I believe this speaks perfectly into you and I today as we face things in our life. And this is kind of an encouragement, a reminder of who God is, so that you aren't just reaching out for those things of convenience, those things that are close to you, but actually you're intentional about reaching out to a God who is present and able to help. So let's look at this. These 4 key areas, and we'll make 4 sort of observations about this that will encourage us. The first one is this: God is always present. God is always present. In verse 1 and 2, he says this: I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Now, this is a really interesting passage in the Old Testament. When they say this phrase, I lift up my eyes, it kind of has this dual meaning, because in a sense, he's lifting up his eyes and he could be looking around at the danger at the top of the mountains. He could be casting his eyes up to Jerusalem. But actually, the Hebrews understood this notion of lifting eyes. It kind of meant to put focus on, or to gaze deeply at something. It was kind of like they were going to fix their eyes, their mind, their heart, their soul on something. So he says, I lift my eyes up to the mountain. And he asks this rhetorical question: where does my help come from? Picture this moment for him. He's in this valley. There is danger around them. He's in a position he might be feeling vulnerable. And he says, where does my help come from? Maybe you've asked that question in your own life. Actually, I'm feeling quite vulnerable. Where does my help come from? Where am I going to get help from? And then he answers his own rhetorical question by saying this: my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Now, an observation about this is he uses 2 titles for God in this section. He says he is a helper, and he says he is the maker. Now, what's interesting about this balance is if he only described God as a helper, but didn't also demonstrate that he was the maker, then it would show that God would just be this one of the forces in this earth, one of the things, one of the options, but actually had no power over anything. But he was sort of able to help out in the moment. Or actually, if he just said that he was just the maker and didn't say that he was a helper, it would have demonstrated that God was this like all-powerful being that created heaven and earth, but was ultimately uninterested in the life of this pilgrim, that was not involved in the detail of day-to-day life. But actually, the balance of this statement that God is both helper and maker means that he is the sovereign, in control, ultimate being, ultimate force. He is God, the one and only true God that has created heaven and earth, that is all-powerful, all-loving. But also, he is available and he is locked into the details of your life. I don't know about you, but that is an encouragement to me. And this psalmist is reminding his soul. That is what this first section is. It is the psalmist reminding his soul, like lifting his soul up and saying that my help comes from nowhere but God. I wonder, in your life, have you forgotten that simple fact? That ultimately God is present, and that he is in control, and he is all powerful, and he is available to help you in your times of trouble and vulnerability. Or maybe this morning you have never known that to be true, that you have never known that God is present and aware of what you're going through in your life. He is our help. So this morning, if you find yourself in a position where you are desperate and you are in need of help, I want to lift you up, to encourage you this morning, to remind your soul that where does our help come from? Our help comes from the Maker, the all-powerful one who is aware of what we go through. God is always present as we walk through this life. The second section is this: God is always watchful. In verses 3 and 4, he says, "He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep." God is always watchful. Now, what's interesting about this psalmist kicks off this section by saying, "He will not let your foot slip." He's painting this picture of stability, of a foundation. I don't know whether you've experienced this in your own life, where maybe things go wrong and maybe life is just complex and a little bit confusing. It can often feel like the ground beneath us is a little bit shaky, kind of like at any moment we could fall through the floorboards and just be like hitting rock bottom. Well, the psalmist is again reminding us, reminding his soul, that God places us in a position of stability and firm foundation. And what is that? That is not on some ideology, that is not on religion, that is not on anything other than Him. God is our firm foundation. So that when you feel like your life is on this shaky ground, actually when we are in relationship with Jesus, God places us on stable footing and He will not let our foot slip. And then He says this: "He who watches over you will not slumber." Now I love this, because this pilgrim, the psalmist, he is writing into a context of people that would often have these gods that would be made out of stone or gold or wood, and even some other gods that would be, like a very ethereal, floating around the sky in their opinion. And, they'd have the sun god and, the god of romance and the god of rain and all these different gods. But the thing is, it was widely accepted at that time that just like humans, gods would sleep. Then the reason that people didn't hear from these gods wasn't that they were completely, existing in their minds, or it was superstition or whatever it might have been, religious tradition. It was actually that they were sleeping and they needed their rest in that sense. And this pilgrim speaks into this moment, and he essentially says this: the God that we serve does not sleep. In other words, He is active and He is watchful. He says, "He who watches over you." And it doesn't paint this picture of a sort of passive God that just stands in heaven looking over the balcony of the clouds being like, "Oh, I wonder what they're going to do today." This picture of watching, it's like a night God, or someone that would stand guard in something in that sense. So it says that our God is not one that sleeps, but He is active, He is alive, He is living, and He is attentive to our life. He watches over us as we live. It says, "Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep." Our God does not miss out on anything. See, the psalmist is affording God His perspective here. I love this, because in our life, how many times do we try and control things and we worry about things and we think, I don't know if God's caught this, I don't know if God's seen this, I've got to figure out all this stuff on my own. But the psalmist is essentially saying, "God, you watch over me. Your eyes are over everything and nothing escapes your sight." And I love this again. I want to really reaffirm and paint this picture that he's just reminding his soul, as he is in a position of vulnerability, that God's perspective is higher than our perspective, that God's view is bigger than our view, and He can see things that we cannot see. And the psalmist is saying, "God, I give you your perspective, and I trust that you see things in my life that I cannot see." Maybe in this moment, you need to give God back His perspective and say, "God, your view is bigger than my view. Your sight is far higher than my sight. And I'm going to stop controlling so many elements and worrying about every element of my life, thinking, I've got to fix this, I've got to sort this, I've got to do this, I've got to stay so attentive, I've got to watch my own back, I've got to figure this all out on my own." When really God is there saying, "I will watch over you and I do not miss out on anything." So God is always present. God is always watchful. And the third section of this psalm is this: God is always guarding. God is always guarding. In verse 5 and 6 it says this: the Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, and the sun will not harm you by day nor the moon by night. So this is a declaration, it's a confession by the psalmist saying, God will guard me. God will be my God. Now the interesting thing is this, is it says that the Lord is your shade at your right hand. Now this speaks into a little bit of a military picture here. So it's in those times they would hold a shield with their left hand, and it meant that their right side was often exposed. And to be at your right hand would often sort of symbol this kind of like camaraderie, or this kind of like being in it together. And the psalmist is basically reminding his people, reminding himself, and to you and I today, reminding us that as we go through this life, as we make this journey, that God will guard our vulnerabilities. That when we remain close to Him, His promise in response is to guard our weak spots and to guard the places in which we are left open. And then he says this: the sun will not harm you by day nor the moon by night. One commentator I read was talking about this idea of the sun being things that can be seen, light, often the threats that we see coming at us, the sort of things in our life that are out to take us out that we are aware of. And then the moon to represent this idea that the things that in the night that come at us that we cannot see coming, the things that we aren't aware of. And it's painting this picture that God protects us from things that even we know about and things that even we don't know about. That God just protects, He guards us against things that we aren't even aware are coming our way. But then in the Hebrew text, they often would use contrast to kind of demonstrate a holistic view of something. So if they said the first and the last, what they really meant was first, last, and everything in between. And what the psalmist is essentially saying when it comes to this Hebrew text is, you know, the sun won't harm you by day nor the moon by night. In other words, day and night and everything in between, God will be your God. God will be your God. This psalmist knows that his protection is found in the shade of God. It is found in the presence of God. I want to encourage you this morning, or maybe even challenge you this morning. This psalmist understood that when he was in a place of vulnerability and danger, the best place he could be is in the shade of God, is in close proximity and relationship to God. My challenge to you this morning is this: how close are you to God this morning? How often do you spend in His presence? How often do you spend just sitting there, reading God's Word, allowing it to shape you, asking the Holy Spirit to move in your life and to convict and to change and to shape you from the inside out? How often and how long do you spend in God's presence? Is it just a box tick exercise in the morning or evening, or is it a life that is lived out in God's presence? Because this psalmist knows that when he's in a place of danger, the best place he can be is in close proximity to God. How close are you this morning? Do you need to make some adjustments in your life to move closer, to draw closer to God? In the New Testament, there's a verse that says, "Draw close to me and I will draw close to you." That is a promise that God makes. Do you need to do some making some movements towards God this morning in your life? So God is always present, God is always watchful, God is always guarding. And then the fourth and final section of this Psalm 121 is this, and it is both a now and a future statement, is that God will always sustain. In verse 7 and 8 it says this: "The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore." Spurgeon, a very famous Bible teacher and commentator, said this, is that this phrase, "He will watch over you," was repeated 3 times. Again, in the Hebrew text would signify this very ultimate, this kind of very superior understanding of something of significance. But it's also a demonstration of this triune God as well. Possibly it could point to the fact that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit watch over you as the ultimate and all-seeing, all-knowing God. I don't know about you, but that encourages me, knowing that the things I face in my life I do not face on my own, but I journey through under the watchful eye of God. The psalmist says this. He says, he will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. In one translation, it says, he will preserve your life. See, it's often in times when we find ourselves, in positions of struggle or pain or trouble, it can be so overwhelming. Be like, how am I going to get out of this? I'm feeling desperate. But it can also make us face the future with a little bit of despair or hopelessness. Be like, how am I going to make it through the rest of my life if I can't even make it through this? And the enemy, when I use this term enemy, I mean either the devil or our flesh or the world or whatever that might be in the biblical sense, is out to whisper these little lies in our life that actually, this is the best it will get. Actually, there's no way through this. Actually, you are not strong enough to make it through this. You might as well give up now and just turn to those easy and convenient things. But this psalmist, again, is making a public confession, more so to his own soul, to say, God will preserve my life. He will be present in this problem. He will be watchful as I go about this journey. He will guard me against vulnerabilities, but he will also preserve and sustain my life. The psalmist is confessing his sustenance. He is saying that God is my source of sustenance, and he will watch over me now and forevermore. It is a promise. It is a kind of encouragement. Look at the confidence that he has. God will watch out for me for the rest of my life. I want to ask you this morning, are there some sources that you've been turning to in your life that have been other than God? The psalmist is confessing his sustenance. He is confessing what it is that will preserve his life. Maybe if you were to spend a few moments this morning being honest with yourself and honest with God, have you been relying on some easy and comfortable and sort of methods or systems or habits or people or ways of dealing with things? Some shallow, hollow, self-medicated ways of dealing with trouble in our own life. That might be reputation, that might be addiction, that might be fun. We can often self-medicate by trying to have these hollow experiences of fun in our life. I'm not saying fun is a bad thing, don't hear me wrong. I'm saying when we only rely on these things to get through in our life, we can find ourselves compounding the problem. The psalmist says, God will preserve my life. Have you been relying on some things, some cheap fixes in your life? Do you need to make some adjustments this morning? God wants to sustain you. So this morning we've looked at God being always present. We've looked at God always being watchful, God always guarding us, and God always sustaining us. And the interesting thing is about this, when we hear these things about God, often we can be like, oh, we know these things, and then we look at our life and we don't make any changes, but we have this knowledge now that God is, he's going to protect us and sustain us and guard us. And then we go, wait, this isn't really happening. When often we actually forget about our part to play in this, where we have to, like we said before, draw close to God, into his presence, into relationship with him. And the thing is, God is gracious and he will never headlock us into his presence or headlock us into relationship with him, but he will always and has always and will always offer an invitation for us to live in relationship with him. So much so that 2,000 years ago, he sent himself in the person of Jesus to be born a baby, live a human life, and to die on a cross, to take on our guilt and our shame and our sin and our old nature, to draw us back into relationship, or to give us the opportunity to live in relationship with God again. And 3 days later, he rose again to give us a hope for our future and to demonstrate his power over death. So this morning, maybe you're like, I'm desperate to know this God who sent himself so much so because of his love to draw us back together, to give me an opportunity to live in relationship with this God so that I don't have to live according to my sinful nature that will seek to pull me away and actually self-sabotage myself. How do I get to know this God? How do I cry out for help? Well, simply the Bible says, if you ask, he will give it to you. And what does this mean? If we literally say to Jesus, Jesus, I cannot do this on my own anymore. I need you to help me. I want to encourage you to take your brokenness, your sin, take all of your failures, your mistakes, take your hopes, your dreams, your future, and just simply say, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. Would you come and take me, come and use me, come and help me? And I promise this morning, your life will change from here on out. And maybe you're listening this morning, you're in a position where you are just desperate for God to come through. I want to encourage you this morning, draw close to Him like never before. I hope today has encouraged you to lift your eyes and to focus on the one that is perfect, the one that can help us, and to stop leaning on the things that are easy and convenient. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you real soon. Hey, thank you for joining us this morning. It's been an amazing morning. Hey, if you decided to cross that line of faith and become a follower of Jesus, or you just have some more questions about faith, about Christianity, about who God is, who Jesus is, all this sort of stuff, we would love to journey this with you. So you can email us at hello@light.church. And we would love to chat, provide you with Bibles, provide you with resources, and get you plugged into a community. But maybe you're wanting to connect this morning. How can they connect?
If you want to connect with us, you can head to light.church/connect and fill out the form there, and we will get in contact and we can get to know you more, but also share with you more of Light Church. There's so much more to Light Church than just these virtual gatherings, so we can't wait for you to connect.
Yeah, also, if you are not already following us on social media, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook. But also, if you are not yet subscribed to this YouTube channel, I want to encourage you right now, go and subscribe, turn on your notifications, like this video. It helps us, but also it's content for you to share for your world as well. So make sure you're subscribed and you're not missing anything that's coming out of Light Church.